I have never seen Stranger Things, and I'm not saying that to try and be cool and crap on popular media. I've never seen Stranger Things, but I have seen many reruns of Bullseye, which makes me sadder than I'd like to admit. And I don't know why I've never seen it. When the first season came out, many people said it was this mix of Stephen King and Steven Spielberg with this weird mystery featuring creatures, sci-fi madness and good character writing. That is up my street, and yet I just never watched it. And then as the show became this global sensation and more seasons were released, my desire to finally tune in kinda dwindled. I feared, without seeing a single episode, that the hype around this show had begun to affect it. That this small town mystery was now a blockbuster, and that's not really my thing. And then I realised I was making judgments based on trailers and photos, and that's not my style either. If I want an opinion on this show, I'm gonna need to actually watch it. And that's what we're doing. I'm gonna watch it all 5 seasons, with the luxury of not having to wait 9 years to actually finish it. So grab a cup of coffee, or whatever they drink in Hawkins, I don't know, as we dive into Stranger Things and explore if it deserves its hype and its 9-year status as one of streaming's biggest shows. But first, what do I know? Just because I haven't seen an episode doesn't mean I've been living under a rock. I know some things, not tons. I've tried to stay away from spoilers, but I know stuff like Will goes missing in episode 1. I know 11 has powers. I know there's a creature called Vecna who doesn't look well, and I know this woman's electricity bill must be through the roof. I'm also very aware that we travel to Russia at some point, and people really don't like that storyline. And there'll probably be a lot more I realise I knew as we go through the show, but for now, let's jump straight into episode 1. So I couldn't sleep and watched this first episode at 3 in the morning, which could have easily ruined my enjoyment of it. I won't lie, I was fucking tired, and yet it was kind of the perfect time. Lights off with no one around, I was immediately immersed into this world that was recognisable and yet so new. And from this first episode alone, it is obvious why it grabbed so many people. It is so atmospheric. This is the strongest thing going for the opening chapter. Its atmosphere is established from the very first scene and it never drops. It's creepy, familiar in a nostalgic sense without being predictable. Every setting feels real and lived in. We as the audience are being dropped off into this world and it doesn't hold our hand too much. It allows mysteries to build and breathe naturally. Us being confused and completely out of the loop is part of the appeal and it executes this masterfully. Also, this is a show where imagination is key. It's obviously going to rely heavily on world building and this group of colourful odd characters. So starting off with a group of our main characters playing Dungeons and Dragons is a stroke of genius. That fun fantasy vibe is there even in this very normal down-to-earth introduction. This isn't just characterful. Yeah, we know they're close and they're a little bit geeky. Okay, great, but it's more than that. It's building on that atmosphere, it's establishing the vibe and the rules of the show, and I like that a lot. The script for episode 1 is incredibly tight. The opening chapter has to introduce us to a lot of plots, such as Will going missing, the scientist guys and Elle, the weird skinny bloke creature and the tentacle wall. So much is revealed and yet it never feels cluttered. This is how you utilise a 50-minute episode. Not a single moment is wasted, and as an audience I appreciate that. I don't feel like the creators are wasting my time with nonsense, nor are they overly indulging in this new world they're creating. Everything feels rooted in story and purpose, and that makes me want to continue watching. It's the reason so much fantasy and sci-fi fails. The creators get so invested in their own worlds that they make it almost impossible for a new audience to easily understand the lore and form an emotional connection to the story. Lore and world building is interesting, but only when we know the consequences of that lore, when we understand what this will mean in the long run. Stranger Things drips this information slowly throughout the first episode, which is a perfect way to pique my interest without boring me with details I'm yet to care about. And this is why characters are so important, especially in this genre of storytelling. You can have the most magical world possible, but if I don't care about the people travelling through it, then it's meaningless. This episode establishes the main cast incredibly well, giving us enough details to form an emotional connection without boring us with information overload. There's also a sense of realism with the characters that offers a nice contrast to the mysterious plot threads that are being built. The overworked, very tired single mother, the sad, grieving arsehole police officer, the group of friends who care deeply about each other, more than they probably realise. Are they archetypes? Yes, 100%, but that's on purpose. That's part of the nostalgic vibe that they're going for, which we'll talk about in more detail later on. Honestly, if we're going to talk about everything this opening chapter does right, we only really need to focus on the first 12 pages of the 75-page script. The 3 opening scenes, the scientist, the boys playing D&D, and Will vanishing into thin air, perfectly captures the 3 main ingredients of the series: the horror, the characters, and the mystery. First, the scientist. Now, I was always going to love this scene. I adore a teaser where a monster eats a random unnamed guy. Of course I do. I'm a Doctor Who fan. That's my bread and butter. This scene isn't necessarily needed. There is a version of this show that opens with the boys playing Dungeons and Dragons and nothing really changes. We see the science facility later on and that's it. This moment is purely there to hook the audience. Opening with 4 kids playing a nerdy game that many haven't played before would be a slightly risky choice. Instead, teasing a horror monster is definitely the strongest start. However, this moment moment is more than just a teaser. It establishes the horror and the dread. The first line of the screenplay is simply, we hear a low-end rumble, like the growl of an unseen beast. And the first page as a whole is a horror script through and through, with lines such as, he sprints down the corridor, running for his life, faster, faster, faster. Watch through the flickering lights as a scientist is sucked up towards the ceiling by something. His legs kick violently in midair and he screams in horror, and then the elevator door snaps shut. It's traditional horror that is realised perfectly on the screen. It's familiar. We've seen this in monster movies before. We know that this scientist is a dead man as soon as he sprints out those doors. This is unapologetically a horror show. And then we meet our first bunch of main characters. And they're not action heroes, but instead a group of kids playing a fantasy game in a basement. The vibe is a complete contrast, and yet the dread is intensified. This quick cut tells us immediately that these characters are not safe, that this world of fantasy and make-believe that they're innocently playing is about to become incredibly real, and whatever that creature was in the first scene is going to enter their lives. And this scene is really sweet. I love how natural it is. They really are just playing, and it's one of the greatest examples of a show capturing the innocence of childhood that I've seen. And I'll be talking about this a lot because it's one of the show's biggest strengths. But this sweetness has that undercurrent of darkness. We as the audience are immediately put on edge due to that first sequence, and as they're innocent kids, we immediately worry for them more than we normally would for new characters. The story is slowly being constructed bit by bit, with each scene building on from the other. We carry that horror and dread through to this moment of normality. And this sounds really obvious, but it's something a lot of shows and films don't do. A story isn't just a collection of scenes one after the other. It should flow. We should take that feeling one moment gives us into the next, and this opening is crafted perfectly because everything is precise. Nothing is wasted. Everything, every line of dialogue, every cut in the edit has a purpose. And then, just as you're getting comfortable, just as you're beginning to relax, the kids venture out alone into the dark. One by one, they head off until only Will is left. The horror has been established. The characters have been introduced. Now, the big mystery must be set up. As Will travels down the dark road, his bike lights begin to malfunction, distracting him just long enough for the horrible skinny bloke thing to make his first proper appearance. Will panics, falls off his bike and rushes home. He sees the creature through the hanging clothes outside. It slowly approaches the house as if it's stalking his prey. Will runs outside into the shed to get a gun, but as he waits, he suddenly realises that the creature is already inside. The light from the bulb intensifies and suddenly Will is gone. And this whole season is amazing for so many reasons. It's shot fantastically, the performance is amazing, it's edited so tightly, but what impresses me the most is how little dialogue there is throughout the whole scene. The dread, the fear is allowed to grow, silence and pause is used just as much as anything else. There's no really lazy jump scares here, no shit dialogue, the terror comes from the waiting and the waiting alone. It's tension being stretched out for as long as possible until finally there's nowhere else to go with it, and then Will disappears. These 12 pages sum up the entire premise of the show. There's something unusual going on in Hawkins, a young boy has gone missing, and normal everyday lives are about to be turned upside down overnight. And I adore when a show just immediately gives you its premise. I'm not left scratching my head for an hour wondering what the show's about. These 12 pages tell me everything I need to know, and I'm hooked immediately. And then, the rest of the episode really follows a familiar crime drama route. We meet the detective, the worried family, the friends that want to help. The side plots are slowly introduced with Nancy and Steve, and this familiarity isn't a bad thing, it's part of the show's charm. Because even though it's delivering these well-trodden plot beats, we know there's something greater going on. The strange creature and the weird little girl who's mysteriously appeared in town. And every scene develops at least one of the three main ingredients of the show. It furthers the horror, the characters, or the mystery. And just as this episode... What? And just if this episode couldn't impress me enough, we get a lovely little bookend. The opening tells us that if you go out alone in the dark, you'll stumble upon something strange, and that's exactly what happens when the trio find Elle alone in the woods. Everything is so neat, and look, I know I'm way behind praising this opening episode. This is old news. This is like when the other day my mum started raving about Touch ID. But you know what? Touch ID is fucking cool, and so was this. I'm excited for the rest. Maybe this show is worth the hype. So I binged the entire season. I planned on watching one episode, then writing about it and watching another one, but no, I failed it, miserably. I just couldn't stop, it's good, and maybe that's for the best, because I don't want this to be a recap video. I want to dive into it, so at least now I can actually construct this video in a way that won't be mind-numbingly dull. You're fucking welcome. So as the entire structure of this video has now changed, let's explore the structure of this show and why we really need to stop comparing TV to films. Over the last few years, a weird mindset seems to have infested television. The idea that good TV is just a really long film cut into 8 or so digestible parts. It seems that a lot of shows think that as long as they have something that resembles a beginning and middle and end overall, then that's enough to call it telly. And yes, I'm talking about most of the Marvel Disney Plus shows. What makes this worse is that a lot of people now praise a show by saying something along the lines of it's like one big film, which no, it's not. And if we're being really honest, that either means it's a bloated movie that needed an editor or a weirdly cut TV show. It feels incredibly old-fashioned, as if cinema is this prestige art where TV is that dusty box in the corner of your room that sometimes you watch mindless crap on. So if you suddenly watch a good TV show, oh, it's like a movie. And I hate it. TV is a medium, like film, like radio and books, and what medium you use to tell a story should mean something. That's the way you as a creator believe the story would best be told. So going into Stranger Things, I was worried, because I've heard a lot of people praise this first season as being like a film. The creators themselves do this with their series Bible pitch. Under the segment structure, they say that the show will be structured like a film. And okay, it's one big story like a movie is, but it's actually an incredibly well structured TV show. Because this isn't an 8-hour film that's been cut up. Individual episodes have a beginning, middle and end. It's serialized overall, but there's episodic elements like there should be in any good show. Episode 1 is mainly about a young boy going missing in a small town. Episode 2 is mainly about a group learning who this strange new girl called 11 is. Episode 7 is full steam ahead towards the final, but a massive part of it is around creating the bath for Elle. It's titled The Bath. It's the episode with the bath. Yes, the main plot along with the subplots are stretched over the course of the show, of course they are, but characters learn and grow in individual episodes. Full-on sequences happen in one episode. Joyce talking to Will through the lights is a main part of episode 3, and if this was a film, most of it would have been cut for time. It's a TV show, and a pretty perfectly structured one at that. The only niggle I have with any of the structure is actually the end of episode 2 and the beginning of episode 3, because this is the only time where it feels like a film has been cut into chunks. Episode 2 ends with Barb seeing this creature and suddenly going missing while Nancy and Steve get familiar with each other upstairs. And then episode 3 opens with Barb in the upside down while Steve and Nancy continue to crease up the bedsheets. There's some lovely editing that cuts between Barb holding onto the poolside for dear life and Steve and Nancy's hands intertwining. It's all very effective. But it's the same scene, and the end of this scene with Barb being dragged away would actually have been a much better ending for episode 2. Cutting these moments up and placing credits in between them kills the flow and the dread that was created. This is the only time during the entire season where I felt the cliffhanger was underwhelming, as if it had been made for the binge model in mind. You're going to watch the next one straight after, so we don't need to convince you with a great cliffhanger. It's a small wobble in an otherwise wonderfully structured TV show. For television. It's not a fucking film. Structurally, the central mystery is broken up effortlessly as we follow 3 distinct points of view. We have the kids, who stumble upon 11 and are desperate to find Will, who slowly uncover the secrets of the Upside Down. The adults who search for Will forces them to slowly come to terms with the supernatural, and then teenagers, who almost accidentally get wrapped up into this world of monsters. Each group's goal is the same, but their journey takes them on very different paths. However, once again, it never feels cluttered. Instead, it's effortless to watch. The storytelling is so confident that you're never left bewildered or confused, except for times when the story is deliberately leading you into that fear of the unknown. And through these 3 different perspectives, we see the show use its secret 4th ingredient. We've had the horror, the character drama and the mystery. Now let's explore nostalgia. It's no secret that Stranger Things has taken a lot of influence from 80s media, mainly by the 2 Stephens, the King and the Berg. Stand By Me, It, E.T. are the obvious ones, as well as many of King's novels that involve a kid with special powers. And I'm not going to go deep into these influences, there's already some wonderful articles and essays about this online, but I do want to explore how these influences and the nostalgia attached to them are used specifically in this show compared to the thousands of recent nostalgia-filled media we've been given over the last 10 years. I've spoken about nostalgia before on this channel, check that out if you're interested, but basically nostalgia as a whole isn't a bad thing. Like anything, it should be used as a storytelling tool. If your pitch is just people like this before, let's heat it up and give it to them again, your film or show is going to feel very shallow. Instead, I always approach nostalgia as an emotion, same as making your audience sad or scared or happy. Nostalgia is warm, it's comforting and familiar, it transports you back into a memory, and it's the closest thing to time travel we'll ever know. And I think for the most part Stranger Things 1 understands this. Because this series isn't just nostalgic for the 80s, the big hair isn't the draw, instead it's nostalgic for childhood, the innocence and the fun and the freeness that comes with being with your friends. The influences, the E.T. and Stand By Me homages aren't the final product. Yes, we have scenes where the kids dress Eleven up like the ET scene, and yes, we get them travelling through the woods like Stand By Me, but the scene isn't just a copy and paste of events, it's the visual language of the show that is used to express a feeling many are familiar with, no matter what decade you grew up in. It's the same for the way that toys are used constantly throughout the show, the walkie-talkies, the slingshots, it's all purposely there to remind us of our own childhoods. I wasn't alive in the 80s, but I remember how important these toys were to me, and I know for certain that I would have thought they could help me save the world if needed. It's the running around town at night, the sneaking out, the frantic bike rides. That's the nostalgia. The influences just help to elevate it. If we take The Lion King for example, bear with me here. The 2019 remake is one of the many recent films pumped out to try and guilt trip you into going to the cinema to regain some of that childhood magic. Yes, it did well at the box office, I couldn't care less, it's a bad film. Why? Because it's a complete copy and paste. It offers nothing new other than, remember this song? You used to love this song. This film is offered up as a replacement for the original, that's all it could possibly stand for. And that's not Stranger Things 1. There's no, I don't need E.T. anymore, I've got Hawkins, and that's why I don't mind how reliant it is on other media, because it's not trying to compete. It's not trying to be a replacement. Is there maybe a few too many nods to past media? Yes, and I am terrified about how this is going to be used in future seasons, but for now, for this one series that feels incredibly standalone, it works, for me at least. I also like how these influences allow for the creators to subvert expectations. There's many little nods to 80s horror throughout the show too, including some posters being in the background of some shots. And if you've seen any horror movies from this decade, you will know that sex is basically a death sentence. A horny teenage couple are usually some of the first to die, may that be in a slasher film or a monster movie. And yet here, that trope is broken. Not only do Nancy and Steve dodge any punishment for their basic human instincts, but they are actually saved by them. Them being upstairs together out of the dark is the reason they don't stumble upon the creature outside. Instead, it's Barb, the sweet, nervous, innocent character who is usually, quote-unquote, rewarded for their innocence in most 80s movies that meet a pretty brutal end. When I was watching the show, I was literally thinking whoever gets it on first is done for, and was very quickly proven wrong in episode 2 and 3. And I'm not a massive fan of punishing or rewarding characters, I'm only using those words because I would have had to when I studied media, but I do like that the show doesn't follow these very obvious, well-trodden 80s horror tropes. Talking of tropes, as mentioned before, a lot of the characters are archetypes that anyone would recognise from other stories. The cop and the grieving mother fit perfectly into your standard police missing person mystery. The kids are from every childhood favourite film, and the teenagers, along with their love lives and family issues, could be straight out of The Breakfast Club. They are familiar on purpose, because from each of their introductions, we as the audience immediately have a grasp of them as people. What makes it interesting is how these three different character groups are suddenly thrown into a story they don't immediately fit. The grieving mother, Joyce, played perfectly by Winona Ryder, God she's amazing in this, suddenly is thrown into this world of magic and monsters. The kids are thrown into a world of conspiracies and lore, forcing them to later go on the run. The teenagers start with relationship drama being the most important thing in their lives, looking down almost on the geekiness of their younger siblings, but are soon are forced to fight a monster, creating traps involving yo-yos. They're pushed into stories their initial archetypes don't necessarily fit, and that's what makes the show so insanely watchable for me. As a writer, I adore character, and I love it when certain tropes aren't just broken, but they are deconstructed on screen. Also, I love how grounded they all are, even when dealing with the nuttiness life has to throw at them. Getting the amazing scene when Joyce screams at her ex-husband in between all the fantasy elements is so my thing. I adore that stuff when normal meets the strange. It's the same with Hopper, he kind of becomes the closest thing to an action hero in the series other than Eleven, but it's always so normal. He breaks into the science facility, but is very quickly captured. He's a bit miserable, he's grieving, and at times a complete arse, and that side of him is treated incredibly naturally. He doesn't have that Marvel-esque sarcasm to him, which is something I expected from this show, and I'm very happy to hold my hands up and say I was wrong. And then you have Eleven, the one character that breaks away from the usual mundane small-town character types. Also, it's incredibly clear to see why Millie Bobby Brown took the world by storm. She's fucking amazing in this series. All the kids are, to be honest. This show would have fallen apart if these performances had been bad. Imagine the Potter kids.
I'm a what?
Dear God, imagine the Potter kids.
Going to take someone's eye out.
Eleven as a character is handled extremely well, with enough there to make her this mysterious, powerful person without ever overindulging in the weirdness of it all. Her powers are brilliantly restricted. The nosebleed, while being an incredibly effective visual, is also a beautifully simplistic way to make sure her special abilities don't become too powerful for the small town plot. Anytime she uses her telekinesis, it wounds her, and if she uses them a lot, it completely drains her. It's a great detail that allowed me to enjoy this strange character without ever wondering why she doesn't just fix the entire plot with a flick of her wrist. I really hope moving forward these powers are kept limited. I have a feeling they won't be, so expect that rant in a later video if I'm right, but for now, I'm happy. I'm being very nice. Too nice. Here's a negative. The two side cops are annoying. They're too sitcom useless for me. There's your negativity. You happy now? You miserable bastard. Are you happy now? But honestly, the reason I'm being so positive is because it's bloody good. I could sit here and find nitpicks, some moments of dialogue that don't ring 100% true, but I don't want to. Is this the best show I've ever seen? No, not even close, but it's perfect for what it is. It's a brilliantly crafted mystery with style, atmosphere, and restraint. And that leads me perfectly to the main thing I adore about this season. The number one reason I think it excels where a lot of other shows fail. And this is simply because the show knows when to shut the fuck up. One of my biggest gripes in any media, may that be TV, film, stage, whatever, is when I think the creators are treating me like a fucking moron where they feel the need to tell me everything, as if I have no imagination or media literacy of my own. And this is a fine line when writing a mystery, because mysteries in their very nature need answers. You want to know who the killer is and why. It's literally the main reason people watch them, to find the answers and feel clever or dumb depending on if they were right. And Stranger Things 1 does two things perfectly when it comes to the mystery storytelling. It doesn't try and outsmart its audience, it doesn't think it's cleverer than its audience, but it also doesn't treat its audience like morons either. A lot of shows hate when a viewer guesses the twist. It's why so many writers change their stories halfway through because someone online worked it out. And that's stupid, because a good mystery should allow people to work it out. You don't want it so obvious that everyone guesses it, but a few people putting together the clues and finding the answer is one of the joys of the genre. This season allows for an audience to guess along with it. It gives you enough clues to piece everything together while throwing in a few good plot twists and red herrings along the way. I already knew that Will survived, but that reveal of his body in the perfectly titled episode, The Body, is wonderful. I know for certain if I'd watched that without knowing, it would have caught me completely off guard. And by the end of the series, the central mystery is concluded. Will Byers is found. He is safe and the promise of the season has been delivered. The conclusions around this are perfectly satisfying too. The evil scientist man dies, the Demogorgon is killed, and the town goes back to normal-ish. The characters have changed, their lives will never be the same, but life continues on and they're just gonna have to cope. It's a satisfying ending to everything that we needed to know. And that's important. Needed to know. Because yeah, there are some things left open to your interpretation and imagination, but that's a good thing. The unsettling nature of the Upside Down exists due to us as an audience barely understanding it. We're given enough information for us to follow the story, but the whole lore of that world is left blank, and that's where fear lives and breathes, in the unknown. Hopper getting into the unmarked car at the end is a very eerie moment. We can guess what it means, but without a concrete answer, our minds are left to run wild. Eleven disappearing with the Demogorgon is perfect. Is she dead? Is she back in the Upside Down? A wonderful question to leave viewers with, to allow them to debate and disagree as a fan base. Even the bitter sadness of Jonathan and Nancy is perfect. That unsaid attraction is all that's needed. She gets the jock, but if that's going to be the right thing for her in the future, it's for her to find out, not us. And of course, the biggest twist at the end is Will suddenly spitting up a slug and seeing the topsy-turvy in his bathroom. And then he has to go back to the dinner table and act like everything is fine. And I know some people would be gutted if it ended there, if we never found out, but I think that's wonderful. One final moment of pure dread before we cut to black. The eeriness, that horror that opened the show is beautifully used to bookend the season. That cut to credits, that sudden end, is exactly how this mystery should be. The good guys won, but the unknown prevails. But of course, this is only season 1. I've seen a lot of people online suggest that this show should have been a one-off limited series, and now that I've watched it, I've got to agree. Even before seeing anything else, season 2 might be amazing, but I just don't think any answers given to those endings will outdo the eeriness of not knowing. I'm afraid any more details about the Upside Down will ruin its appeal for me. I love not knowing, I'd happily stop here, but I've promised to watch it all, and that's what I'm gonna do. Stranger Things really was lightning in a bottle, a little series that sparked something in the audience's imagination. A journey into nostalgia and childhood with monsters and mayhem thrown in for good measure. It's something that I'm so glad became a hit. To see such a well-crafted story celebrated is amazing. However, I can't help but wonder as we go on this journey if it became a victim of its own success. Only time will tell.